Who am I?
Richard Kazimer, media veteran.
Why I got in radio is because I'm good with a knife.
Contributor in Perth, Australia.
Our friend Richard Kazma in the United States.
How are you guys enjoying the 19th century? Is that working out for you? How can you say, I'm not making fun of you as a race, I'm making fun of you as black performers?
I think as a country, Americans are as patriotic as the most rabid UK football hooligan.
Who am I?
Richard S Kazma. How are you this morning, sir?
Boo! Fine, how are you, sir?
He's actually giving a clue. By the way, if you'd like to be this man Boo's friend on Facebook, Richard S Kazma is where you'll find him. The S, I have no idea what it stands for, and I'm not even going to ask. It's one of those times when you say, I don't want to know. Anyway, if you'd like to be his friend on Facebook, Richard S Kazma. Kazma, by the way, is spelled Kazimer, and he's happy to be a friend. He'll be just about anybody's friend, except I must stress, taxman need not apply. It's all to do with the traumatic experience with the American IRS that we also won't go into. There is also no truth that the taxman in 5 other countries wants him. Now, sir, while we're talking about horror stories, and let's face it, if the taxman in 5 countries wanted you, that would be a horror story. One of the things, and I might actually have to take issue with you on this in just a moment, but we'll wait and see first. It's that wonderful tradition that comes up at the end of this month, 31st of October, it's always celebrated, Halloween. And let's face it, you Americans have celebrated it so much that it's one of those things that seems to be catching on everywhere.
Yes, you know, when I first started out here, it was not a real popular celebration in the early days of the United States. I mean, we celebrate it now less than we have in past decades, but the early settlers here were Protestants and Quakers, very puritanical, and Halloween at the time, back in the early 1600s, mostly Catholic, Episcopalian, and pagan holidays were actually ignored, if not banned. So Halloween falling under that category, the Puritans and the Quakers and the Protestants didn't want to have anything to do with it. The southern colonies, such as Virginia and Maryland, they did have some Halloween traditions being observed, but I think that's because those states had tobacco, and here in New England they didn't, so they probably had a reason to celebrate by lighting things up. By the mid-1800s, when our immigration increased, a lot of Irish immigrants came over here fleeing the potato famine, and they being predominantly Catholic, Celtic and Gaelic, and also European, those Halloween traditions came with them. The jack-o'-lantern, you guys do jack-o'-lanterns in Australia?
No, well, it's starting to catch on. I mean, Halloween's one of those traditions that is, let's put it this way, it's been a bit slow to catch on here, but oddly enough, even though it is originally an Irish tradition, which is something that you've identified, people from an Irish Celtic background here in Australia certainly celebrate it and have done, and they're the people I think who are among some of the most enthusiastic participants, although it's definitely growing, I must say. It's interesting how we probably can blame you Americans for the strong influence of it here now, let's put it that way, even though you didn't start it, it's probably fair to say you finished it as far as we're concerned.
Tracing back the lineage, the jack-o'-lanterns, the Irish traditionally used turnips in their country, and when they came over here to the New World, pumpkins were very plentiful, so that's why traditionally we used pumpkins for the jack-o'-lanterns. In the 1800s, the Catholics and the Episcopalians wanted to start to preserve their traditions as we got out of a less puritanical society and more into that melting pot of all the immigrants. So they started to lobby and campaign to put these holidays, which is Halloween and All Saints' Day, on the public calendar. So the magazines started to publicize these events, and it just got more and more popular. It turned into more of a communal and family holiday as opposed to the religious and supernatural experience, kind of like what Christmas has turned into.
Actually, one of the impressions that we get, and I sort of understand that perhaps sometimes the impressions are a little bit exaggerated, but certainly from the best of my understanding, there's still people with fairly strong religious convictions in the United States. At what point did Halloween manage to break that barrier where people didn't see their religious beliefs as conflicting with things like Halloween? I mean, obviously I accept that some people probably still do, but by and large, for it to become an accepted national celebration, is there a point in time that you can pinpoint when it became acceptable? People didn't find it conflicted with their religious views.
Absolutely. In 1950, the United Nations Children Fund, UNICEF, began a campaign for children to collect money at Halloween for underprivileged children around the world. And that immediately lent a legitimate excuse for kids to beg their parents to go trick-or-treating by saying, but Mom, it's for the children. And then TV shows back in the 50s like The Wonderful World of Disney, Ozzie and Harriet, Leave It to Beaver, and The Andy Griffith Show all featured episodes of kids trick-or-treating on Halloween. And what kid didn't want to be like Opie, the Nelsons, or the Cleaver Boys? I certainly did. So that's when you started to see all this commercialization and this public acceptance. If we're watching Dave and Rick Nelson go trick-or-treating on TV, then it's okay for all of our kids to go out and do it. And then Halloween became the booming business that it is from the 1950s on. You know, Halloween here in the States is the second largest commercial holiday, accounting for almost $7 billion a year in revenue, much of that on candy, costumes, as well as dental bills and bail money for adults.
Bail money for adults. I'm almost afraid to ask, but I'm afraid you've put the bait down and I'm taking it. Go on, explain it.
Well, you know, Salem, Massachusetts, the home of the notorious witch trials, probably is one of the single most beneficial communities here in the United States that profits from Halloween. It's like Mecca. People of all sorts of persuasions just go there every single year to spend an entire day and night doing a New England-style Mardi Gras in Salem. And these people consist mostly of the costume challenged and the overly imbibed, if you get my drift.
When you say the costume challenged, that means that they go out, they get a skinful, they're dressed up as God knows what, and they behave like an idiot and manage to get themselves arrested. Is that kind of the short version?
That's it in a nutshell, buddy. You've been there, huh?
No. But it always amazes. I'm glad to see, I am always glad to see that other countries have their fair share of idiots. I'd hate to think that we were alone in that. And every time I hear about idiots and people doing stupid things in other parts of the world, I do like to feel that, hey, you know, we're actually quite normal.
Oh, yes, you are. Compared to us, you look up idiot in the dictionary and you'll see a picture of somebody from the United States, probably me or my relative. So you're definitely not alone in that.
So places like Salem, I guess. What about in Pennsylvania? I kind of think that Pennsylvania is another one of those places that would have to have some sort of Halloween attraction.
The older cities, the old original colony cities, like Pennsylvania, Boston, even Portland, Maine, New York City, where there's a lot of people from different cultures, and there's a long tradition of established celebrating here in the United States. They have their celebrations, but again, it's not like it used to be, not back in the 70s or even the 80s where they had these really full-blown extravaganzas. Halloween is now so commercialized. The kids today don't make their own costumes like we used to, where you just got a stick and a bandana and put some chalk on your face and you were the hobo and that was it. Now everything you go to the store and buy them, they're all pre-made, prefab. Even the candy, nobody makes any homemade candy anymore. Gone are the days where you went to somebody's house and they gave you fresh cookies out of the oven or candy apples because everybody's afraid of giving a kid something that's going to cause them a food allergy. So everything is right off the shelves. Even the towns restrict the hours and even the days in which kids can go celebrating. There's no more Halloween festivals at public schools. And it has nothing to do with people being politically correct. It's the Christian fundamentalists can't separate good, clean childhood fun with satanic rituals. So they don't want any of these kids showing up as a ghost or as any political figure or pirate or anything.
I thought you'd very clearly got a separation of church and state, so therefore something like the issue of religion in schools was never an issue because it's not something that public schools get involved in over there.
That goes back to the puritanical days and what resulted from the Salem witch trials, which had absolutely nothing to do with actual witchcraft and had everything to do with illegal land acquisition and accusations of your neighbors. Because of all that and because of that atrocity of 19 people being hanged, that's where the whole separation of church and state came into the Constitution. It's to prevent any single state or local municipality controlling all of the religions, all of the laws, and the judicial system within that area, much as what happened in Salem. The separation of church and state said you as a state or a community cannot be all Puritan, all Quaker, all Catholic, or whatever. So that's where that comes from.
Okay. And you also mentioned the fact that it was on the wane. And you touched on something which I thought to myself, putting aside any of the religious arguments, which I accept for some people would be there, but it just seems to me, and as I've talked about before, I think that it's one of those things that many people have sort of moved away from. I don't necessarily know that a lot of people who might consider themselves to be quite religious would actually see that their religious beliefs and something like Halloween conflict. So if we put the religion to one side a moment, you touched on something else that I thought was rather interesting, and that is you said that when it comes to handing out the what we'd call the lollies, what you call the candy and that sort of stuff, because people are so terrified that they might give a kid something with some ingredient in it for which they might be allergic, that has put a lot of people off, and I suppose also has restricted sometimes in some instances kids being able to go out. It seems to me that if anything is ever going to kill off a celebration like that, that will just about be what does it.
That's true, and that's why we have girls and boys clubs and community organizations and community centers hold all these parties for the kids as opposed to the schools doing it. So that takes the burden off the schools to not do anything that's going to offend any parent or any child. And that's why the towns that can afford it have their own parades and celebrations. I think it's gone back to more of a low-key community event as opposed to an outright national event like Valentine's Day, which is so commercial, or even Christmas, not to put Christmas in the same par with Halloween. But from the upside, it brings the community closer together. Whether or not that community chooses to celebrate Halloween in any shape or fashion, I'm seeing more and more neighborhoods looking out for those kids that are actually going out, where it's shorter hours, it's at dusk as opposed to it's all hours of the night, and it's more of a protective environment, and I think that's okay.
Are you serious? At one point, people used to go out at all hours of the night. Are you serious?
Oh, absolutely. You'd go out until midnight and trick-or-treat.
No wonder some people got the door slammed in their face. Goodness me.
Well, people would indicate that they were open for business. This is where you get back to that crossover that the adults were actually having a party. So the adults were in the dining room or the living room socializing, and then you could see the jack-o'-lantern on the front porch, and the porch light was on, which meant, yes, we're open, we're still giving out candy. Those days have been gone for some time, but everybody seems to have a good time nowadays.
What do you do for Halloween?
Traditionally, I buy more candy than we have kids in our neighborhood, so it's an excuse for me to eat candy for the next 2 weeks.
Oh, okay. Thinking about your own neighbourhood, how many kids around there sort of come knocking at the door and do the old trick-or-treat thing?
I think we probably had 20 if we had that many at all last year. I have 3 kids that live next door, my immediate neighbors.
Yep.
The rest of the community is quite elderly. And then the kids in the neighborhood on the main street that's above me don't usually come down to this end of the road because there's a condo development in this cul-de-sac where I live, and those people are 65 plus. So those kids know that this is an elderly community, and they're usually in bed by 6 o'clock. So I make out okay, or I only have to feed the kids next door.
God, isn't that amazing? You've got a whole bunch of people living near you who think you're a dirty, rotten stop-out who never goes to bed. And you probably go to bed at 9:30.
Oh, absolutely, yes. Going to bed at 9:30 with a bag full of candy that I'm eating myself. So it works out.
Yeah, and you've talked about, instead of having a national celebration now, what you've got is a smattering of local celebrations. Do you think that there is a drive? And I mean, you also talked about some of the issues, like, for example, the food allergies and the fact that there's a lot of commercialisation. Do you think that we're starting to see a point where people are saying, let's go back to basics, let's make this fun again? That perhaps there is an argument to say that, especially with the commercialisation, it just went too far, and that people have sort of woken up and said, no, we don't want to do that. Let's have a bit of fun again.
Yes, and it's been an ongoing process, I would say, for the past at least 10 years, where it's just dying out. It's just stuff that people, you don't do it, you do it, it's all the same. The kids go out for a few hours and they get some candy and it's still daylight and then it's done. Or else they go to the community centers and it's over. Will it disappear altogether? Probably not, but I think that with kids that are growing up a lot faster and that everything is immediate, the instant gratification, the video games and what's on television and movies, that these sort of traditional homespun holidays are falling out of fashion and favor. Is that a good thing? I don't know. I mean, anytime you lose a bit of your country's history, it's not necessarily a good thing, but will we miss it? Probably not.
Actually, it's quite interesting when you have a look at stuff like that, because you're quite right. I suppose in some respects people's entertainment is changing. One of the things I was thinking about, though, is one of the significant things about Halloween always been the fact that perhaps for a lot of people, especially for those in the northern part of your country, it becomes the last hurrah before your winter, really, doesn't it? Because I suppose in some parts of the world, we talked about New York, and I guess even where you are, the cold winter can drive a lot of people indoors. Is this one of the last outdoor activities people can do before the winter proper really sets in?
That's a good point. We're into fall now, and as we spoke about a few segments ago, the fairs are starting up. So this is the last hurrah. It's harvest season. It's sweater and coat weather. Yeah, this is pretty much it for our holidays and our getting about and enjoying things from a community standard. And then we'll get into all the winter sports and the winter activities. That's a great thing about living in New England, is that we have 4 seasons of fun.
Oh, that's all right. As long as you have 4 seasons of fun, you've got absolutely nothing to complain about. As always, my friend, much appreciated. Don't forget, if you'd like to be Richard's friend on Facebook, Richard S Kazma, is what you need to look for. Kazmer, by the way, spelled Kazimer, or for the benefit of our American friends, Kazimer. Meantime, we shall have a chat next week, and you enjoy the spooky stuff.
All right, brother. Eat, drink, and be scary.